our hard-working family this week comprises of Chris Rand, who blogs about issues that affect the Queen Edith's part of Cambridge City, that, as we know, falls under the South Cambridgeshire parliamentary constituency. Anthony Carpen is a former civil servant who now uses social media to empower social action and, dare I say, the big society. You're getting a hard stare. I think I got away with that. He's been videoing many of the hustings. In fact, he's videoing this programme as well. Not just those city hustings, but also some neighbouring ones as well. And a new voice on the panel, Pam Jenner. She works as a PhD researcher and drama teacher at the Anglia Ruskin University, Cambridge campus. She was previously a journalist on the Cambridge News and also a qualified counsellor. So good evening to all of you. Pam, can you just pull in your microphone a little bit there? I've got the plum microphone for Pam, and let's get underway. And I know, Chris, that over the last few weeks, as well as Cambridge City hustings, there's been South Cambridgeshire hustings as well. And I think in between all of that, you've also gotten the chance to speak to all of the candidates.
Yes, I have. Yes, it's been good. And I have to say, whilst all the attention's been focused on the Cambridge constituency because it's such a close race and so interesting, that constituency, of course, has started to get a little bit niggly in places, and meanwhile I've just fallen in love with South Cam's constituency. It's just 5 terrific candidates, and they know how to speak well, and they get on well with each other. The hustings have been a delight, to be honest. And
do you think it affects the quality of the debate? The fact that, as we know, it would be fairly likely that Heidi Allen, the Conservative candidate, would win probably by a fair margin, simply because it's that sort of constituency.
It is. And what's surprised me, though, is that a couple of candidates at the Homerton College hustings just came straight out with it and said, well, look, we know Heidi's going to win, but... And it was just so refreshing to hear that after you get the national leaders, every time they're asked with a question of, well, who would you go into coalition with? They go, well, that's a hypothetical question. Whereas here, they're being realistic. Heidi is almost certain to win for the Conservatives in South Cambs. So the other candidates are coming out and saying, don't worry about that. You've got a chance, really, to go out and vote for what you believe in and who you like. And there's no tactical voting concerned. And, you can make an impact in the numbers.
It's interesting. I remember when Dan Grief of the Labour Party came in to speak to Sam on the Election Studio programme a couple of Sundays ago. And he basically did take that approach. He knew that as the Labour candidate, he probably wasn't going to win in South Cambridgeshire. However, what he wanted to do was to get the Labour vote out in that area and push it up as high as possible, which I guess is the appropriate attitude.
Very much so, yeah. Dan's a tremendous speaker. He's a real find for them, I think, as is Simon Saggers for the Green Party, who has really been impressing people at the hustings. Very well spoken. After the Homerton College student hustings, I saw a student go up to him and said, do you have any sort of national ambitions? And he said, well, no, really, I don't. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, I'd vote Green tomorrow if you were leader of the party.
That's quite intriguing, isn't it? Looking at your list for South Cambridgeshire, and I should say that a full list of the candidates in Cambridge City, South Cambridgeshire and South East Cambridgeshire is on the Cambridge105 website. But how many, is it just Sebastian Kindersley for the Lib Dems who stood at the last election? There's no second time around, is there for you?
That's right. That's right. And I think Heidi Allen actually wasn't even involved in politics at the last election, for one. I know Marion Mason for UKIP's been a councillor for some time, Stevenage, and Sebastian, of course, has been a local councillor for a very long time.
It's a double councillor, isn't it?
He's a double councillor indeed. But so yes, that we have got candidates who are very new to this, which is quite interesting.
Actually, picking up on that, Anthony, it's a sort of similar story in Cambridge City. Obviously, Daniel Zeichner is going second time around, and Julian Huppert too. But again, the others are all newbies, aren't they? Pretty much.
They are, and actually, one of the things I've done in the past couple of weeks since the last election panel I've been here, I've actually filmed the Homerton College hustings that Chris was talking about earlier, and the South East Cambridgeshire hustings.
Yeah, I'd like to come on to the South Cambridgeshire ones in a moment to get your views on that. But just particularly on Cambridge then, having how would you compare Cambridge City with South Cambridgeshire? In terms of the quality of the debate which is going on?
Well, actually, I think the quality of the debate has been pleasantly high across the hustings, and having spoken to all of the candidates, I think it's Patrick O'Flynn and Keith Garrett are the only two I haven't actually spoken to. I've spoken to all of the others.
I gather there's been a recent sighting of Patrick O'Flynn as well, which is quite promising. He did actually, I think, appear at the hustings last night, because he hasn't been to as many as the others, has he?
No, he hasn't. But again, I think that's a very sound tactical move on his part, because many of the organisations that have organised hustings in Cambridge have tended to be from a left liberal standpoint, and he has said openly at his event, which Douglas Carswell came to, that he's actually going to focus not on public debates where he's less likely to gain extra votes, but actually just to concentrate on the streets.
Chris?
We should probably point out that Patrick O'Flynn did, of course, turn up to the literary festival, should Britain leave the EU debate, where he took on Julian Huppert in a sort of fairly packed university debating forum, and that was excellent. So he will turn up where it's
sort
relevant.
Of strategically choosing them all. I'll return to South East Cambridgeshire in a moment, but I'd like to bring in Pam, and welcome to our election panel. Your constituency, well, not your constituency, but you work in Cambridge, but you live out towards Saffron Walden, so that gives you an entirely different perspective on what it's like South Cambridgeshire, only worse.
Yes, absolutely. Saffron Walden constituency. I've noted just recently, according to the Voter Power Index, the average UK voter has 4.35 times more voting power than people living in Saffron Walden. It has been said that you could put a monkey up as a Conservative candidate and they'd get in. So there is a general feeling of apathy around the general election, but we do have our local district elections in Uttlesford, and there's far more interest in that and in the local issues than there is actually in the general election.
Now, it's Alan Hazelhurst, isn't it, I think, is the candidate there, and he's a deputy speaker as well, I think.
Well, he
was. Sorry,
yes,
I guess we need to be precise. He needs to be re-elected again, presumably, at the when Parliament reconvenes.
What is interesting is that Sir Alan hasn't attended the two hustings that we've had in the Saffron Walden constituency. He said he's been too busy knocking on people's doors to come to hustings.
Is there any evidence that he's been knocking on people's doors?
Well, he hasn't knocked on my door.
Right.
But the fact is that he could actually speak to far more people at hustings than he probably could during that time knocking on people's doors, I would have thought. But he hasn't attended, which hasn't gone down well with the other candidates. And the other thing that is going to happen in Saffron Walden, and is going to be a change, is that we've generally had the Liberal Democrats coming second to Alan Hazelhurst, and I think that's going to change now. The figures
in favour of who, would you say?
Labour or UKIP. Either of those.
So that's interesting. It's a bit like the Premier League, where everybody tries to get into fourth place. For this constituency, it's second is the place to be, because
absolutely.
You can see to have done something.
Yeah.
And do the local elections, how closely do they mirror the national elections? That's to say, how well do the Conservatives do in those?
Well, like at most local elections, they usually go against the party that's in power. I suspect that the Liberal Democrats will do better in the district council elections than they will do in the general election. People do tend to vote on local issues, and we have a new party as well, which is called Residents for Uttlesford, which may gain some votes.
And who's obviously local residents, but is there particular? Would you say they would be representative?
Well, I think they're called Residents for Uttlesford. My feeling is that they're more residents for Saffron Walden. They don't seem to particularly represent the whole district. And also there are the several former Conservative district councillors that have gone over to Residents for Uttlesford. But
it makes a change from UKIP, I guess.
Well, that's right, yeah. I think it will be, though, between Conservative and the Liberal Democrats in the local election. But there is far more interest because we really, aren't sure what it's going to be.
And that's interesting, I think, this point about the local elections, because if you look at what's happened in Cambridge, the City Council in particular, when at the last election it was a Lib Dem City Council. And as we know, at the most recent local elections last year, it tipped over after sort of a bit of a wobble in the middle, shall we say. I think it was the mayor's casting vote that kept the Lib Dems in power on the City Council. it's gone towards Labour. But as we know, or as it looks, I should say, it pretty much could go either way. Would you think that's a fair summation, Chris and Anthony?
In the city council, it could, but I don't think there's any chance of Labour losing their majority on the city council this election, and possibly not even next when you actually look at the seats that are up for grabs. So they'll probably have a majority for at least another year, if not two, whatever happens.
I notice, if we return briefly to South Cambridgeshire, I think this was probably at one of the recent hustings, Heidi Allen was talking about inefficiencies at the county council, basically saying, and I quote here, that the county council had a long way to go to become more efficient, and claiming that staff were dragging out jobs to protect their departments from more cuts, which is interesting because obviously both Heidi Allen and the county council are both Conservative in colour.
It's true, yeah. I think Heidi has just picked up on something that's being talked about quite a lot locally, particularly the closer you get to the city, about how dissatisfied people are with the county council. Certainly, as far as anyone in the city is concerned, of course, that's a foregone conclusion that the county council have no interest in us, and they don't do anything for us at all, really. And bizarre things are happening all the time, like charging at the park and ride and turning the street lights off at light and things which are just clearly not taking into account the well-being of the city at all. But I think Heidi Allen has picked up on that and realised that it wouldn't be an unpopular thing to show at least some reservations about the county council.
It's an interesting thing. I wonder if she can actually do anything when she, when we shouldn't presume these things really, but come election day, in the event of her being elected, as to whether or not there's actually anything she can do and pressure to bring to bear.
Well, this is the issue around. Do we have a unitary authority? Do we go for some form of local government restructure or an evolution of the city deal? And one of the things that you need for that, in order to get that restructure, is an Act of Parliament. Now, I think one of the things I found refreshing, actually, from all of the candidates in South Cambridgeshire, is they're taking a very fresh look at basically what should the governance structure of Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire actually look like, because I think there's a general feeling, certainly in Cambridge, across the political spectrum, that the current setup isn't working. And for me, this was exemplified by a recent article that John Vale of the Cambridge News published around lampposts and whether CCTV cameras could actually fit onto lampposts which were owned by the county council.
They can now. They've taken the bulbs out. Plenty of space.
And it's ended up in an unseemly spat between the city council and the county council, where actually, in the grand scheme of things, most people don't see, quite understandably, the difference between the city council and the county council. It's just one and the same thing. So
it is confusing. I remember when they moved parking in around Cambridge, which was with the city. Well, apparently it was with the county council before I arrived in Cambridge myself 10 or so years ago. Then they moved it to the city council, and now it's back with the county council, and they're closing the bit of the library where you go and renew your residence parking permit, or something very similar, which of course in itself has caused a few difficulties.
Yeah, I've been speaking to all the local election or local council candidates in Queen Edith's over the last week, and certainly one of the policies of Matt Worth, who is the Labour candidate, is that we need a strong Labour City Council grouping so it can take the arguments to the county council, and that's why he would say we need more Labour councillors in the city, so that it makes the council speak more with the city council speak more with one voice.
But actually, speaking to several of the Labour candidates and also a couple of the Green candidates, one of the things they've said they would certainly like to see, certainly as far as the huge number of student activists that they've got, is to get them out and about into the villages, if anything, to show some of their core vote out in South Cambridgeshire that actually their parties also have a presence. I was at a gathering of the Cambridge University's Labour Club for an event with Daniel Zeichner, and there were dozens of students there, and it just made me wonder actually what would the impact be on the Labour Party if some of those students could get out and about to help their fellow candidates, Dan Grief and Hugh Jones in South Cambs and South East Cambs respectively.
Interesting. That's an interesting thought on that. We'll take a pause for a moment. Better do the travel in a few moments' time. I've been carrying on, by the way, with my survey, which I've been told is completely erroneous, of who has the most posters up. And I was wandering along Kingston Street today, and I can tell you that I saw posters for the Labour Party, the Green Party, the Vote Referendum Party, and also the Vote Fozzie Bear. And I think a couple of those aren't actually participating in the election.
Cambridge 105 Travel.
To the roads then at 6:24. The A14, one lane closed and queuing traffic due to an accident. The lorry and 3 cars involved. This westbound just before junction 32, the Cambridge Road at Histon, and junction 31, the M11 at Girton. Congestion at the moment is back to junction 34, which is at Fen Ditton. Got one of the 2 lanes closed there. M11 is pleased to say back to normal, Cambridge South and Harston, but it's slow on the A10, the Cambridge Road, going northbound, the Will Burton Road. The Barton Road out of town is busy between the Fen Causeway and M11 Junction 12. Newmarket Road, this is coming into the city, round by the Coldens Lane Retail Park. It's slow there. Also slow on that section of the Newmarket Road between the A14 Junction 35 and the Barnwell Road. And also, he said, as his screen moved, this will teach him not to put it to one side beforehand. Fen Causeway, southbound between Lensfield Road and the High Street is slow. We've got congestion as well between Trumpington Road and the Newnham Road, so quite slow, it seems, round there at the moment. Quickly to the trains and the planes, nothing particularly to worry about on either of those. Cambridge 105 Travel, your next update a little after 20 to 7.
Spot a jam we're not talking about. Call us hands-free on Cambridge 967 105.
You're tuned to Cambridge 105.
Sunday Breakfast is delivered over the airwaves fresh from the Gwyder Street studios from 8. News both local, national and international, the review of the weekend sporting action and a guest paper reviewer. I feature the Cambridge quiz and some feel-good music before a guest from across the Cambridge scene. Join me, Phil Rowe, for Sunday Breakfast on community radio in your city, Cambridge 105.
The traffic from Trumpington into Cambridge was so slow this morning. I could have walked faster.
So I missed my train and it made me late for a meeting at work. I know other people have got a right to drive to work, but why do it when I'm in a hurry? I mean, all those cars. Where are they going? If only there was another way to get to the station area in the morning.
Well, now there is. From Tuesday 7th April, Stagecoach is introducing its new peak hour Route R bus service from Trumpington Park and Ride to Cambridge Railway Station. And it only takes 5 minutes via the guided busway. That's right, only 5 minutes. So whether you're catching a train or work in the area near the railway station, the new Route R bus from Trumpington Park and Ride is the way to go. What's more, it's great value at only £3.20 return. So you save money as well as time.
For more information, visit stagecoachbus.com or call 01480 309 084.
Greener, smarter travel with Stagecoach.
Cambridge 105's proud to be out and about in the city. Do you have an event coming up and like us to be there? Email your details to publicity@cambridge105.fm. Cambridge 105, closer to our community.
Cambridge 105. These days I'm afraid of me. There's fire where my heart should be. My car I stop looking, take back all that I put in, elevate and pull you in. Maybe if I stop.
There's a rival network which has a Ray Morris song with a version of the Beatles' Love Is All You Need. But that's her new single release. Anyway, Love Again, Ray Morris at Cambridge 105. It is our election panel on a Wednesday night. There's a couple more to go. And before the big day, with me this week, Pam Jenner, who is with Anglia Ruskin University, also a former Cambridge News journalist, Anthony Carpin, social media activist, and also Chris Rand, who blogs on Queen Edith's. I'd like to try and do a bit more sort of rounding up of what's been happening at the hustings over the past few days and the last couple of weeks. And how the compare and contrast, really, I think, between the different constituencies. And Anthony, I think you've done South East Cambridgeshire as well, haven't you?
That's correct.
What's the level of debate like there?
It's just as high as South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge. Actually, the standard of debate has been pleasantly high across the hustings, and also the candidates have said, and certainly from the hustings I've seen, it's either been over 100 people at each hustings or standing room only, which is really, really good to see.
That's very good. Is it the same 100 people?
No,
there's always going to be some overlaps, of course.
There will inevitably be some overlaps, i.e. me, and maybe a couple of others. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, they have been very, very diverse audiences.
Right.
And I think in particular the Papworth Trust hustings, where we've had people with various disabilities who were absolutely brilliant in terms of the quality of the questions and their targeting. They were very, very difficult questions for the candidates to answer. And again, I'm in the process of actually processing the footage from that to allow everyone to see who said what.
Yeah, and I mentioned this earlier on before you arrived, but it is a good means, and I guess just pop Anthony Carpin into YouTube, and that we'll find that. And of course, the ones Richard Taylor has done as well.
Yeah,
also,
Richard's been absolutely brilliant.
Taking a look at it.
And one of the things to add to that actually is looking at my stats on YouTube. They have gone through the roof. Normally on YouTube, I get about 20 views per day. So about 100 views per week. In the last 7 days, or in the last 14 days, I've had well over 1,000.
And presumably what's happening is that, whereas ordinarily, and if you'll forgive me, it's the political anoraks who look at it, but now it is clearly really, really engaging with the public.
Absolutely, because what I've gone and done is I've gone to as many of the candidates as I possibly can and asked them to film short introduction interviews, short 3-4 minute pieces with each of the candidates, just so that they can introduce themselves and that they all have a piece of digital video that they can use on their websites. This is something, obviously, that I've been campaigning on the political parties to actually do themselves over the past few years. They didn't do it, so I said, right, I'm going to make you do it. And they've done it. Thank you.
Well, what have the topics been? I see that housing seems to have come up quite a bit, both nationally and locally, and I'm wondering if it's the same, if you like, the same elements of the housing debate that we're hearing about nationally that are getting the attention locally, or if it's something a little bit more specific, because we've got a lot of new build going on, for example, particularly, I guess, in South Cambridge, heading perhaps over to South and Walden as well.
Definitely. Loads of new building in Uttlesford.
Mm.
Yeah.
And has that generally got the approval? Is this one of the reasons why you've got your new local district council party appeared?
Nobody wants the new housing in their area, really. Everybody agrees that the other thing is that people do recognise we need more social housing, we need more council housing, if you like.
But the NIMBYs are back, are they?
Well, they are, yeah. But what
not in my backyard for those who've been away for the last 20 years.
But what I've observed from all the new housing developments that have gone on is that they're not they're not social housing, they're not housing for the poor, and it is changing the face of Saffron Walden, particularly massive development. And one particular issue that's topical in Saffron Walden, which I'm sure must be the case elsewhere, is that the school places. There are so few school places. And I think it's interesting to note that the Conservatives in their leaflet say that they're going to build a new primary school in Saffron Walden, but there is not a problem with secondary school places. And I heard yesterday of a mother who has just been told that she cannot get her child into Saffron Walden County High School where she lives, and has to go to Stansted. Her child will have to go to Stansted for secondary school.
And how far away is that?
Well, that's 8-9
far away
miles
enough,
away.
yes.
Yeah.
Particularly in the areas that. I went 6 miles away to school, but there was no school on the way. You know?
Actually, one of the things I've seen in the Cambridgeshire hustings is it's not so much no housing whatsoever. People are actually saying we need the infrastructure in place. We need the public services in place. And the problem we've had with developments in the past, and I think Cambourne is an example of this. That's not to criticise the people who actually live in Cambourne. This is a criticism of the government process that led to its development, is they didn't put the infrastructure in there first and then build the housing around it. It was literally letting the developers.
Well, my friend and colleague Tim Willett, who's on After 7 with New Music Generator, he is a Cambourne resident, and goodness knows how long it was after he moved in before broadband turned up, and this is supposed to be in connected Cambridgeshire.
This was one of the things I've always felt about Cambourne, because I've been there on a couple of occasions to film some of the City Deal meetings, is why didn't they do what we have in Cambridge and have the local council offices almost as a guild hall with a central market square that's a public space and a public meeting space, rather than have it as this faceless, featureless office stuck on the edge of a business park, which is not easy for anyone to get to except by car.
Yeah, it's kind of like drive-through. It's like a sort of McDonald'sisation of local government. Pam?
Yeah, no, I really want to come in there because I think actually it is unfair to call Uttlesford residents NIMBYs, because really, as you pointed out, the problem with all this housing development is we have a shortage of doctors, we have a shortage of GP surgeries, a shortage of school places. There is not the infrastructure, and I think that's going on countrywide. I think that's reflected everywhere. They bung the houses in first, and then years later start to add the infrastructure.
So in a way, the problem is not housing policy, although there is a problem with housing policy, clearly, because there's not enough houses. But the other side of it is all the other departments around it and the people supplying these services. And dare I say, somebody should give a stern talking to and a hard stare maybe to some of the developers who could build these things along the way.
That's exactly it. We've got a different problem around here in terms of housing, in that the developers all want to build around here because there's massive demand for housing, so they can really make it.
Yet at the same time, I don't know if you heard a couple of weeks back when John Vale was here from the Cambridge News, and he was talking about an article he'd written where the journalist sitting on this side of the desk gets the nice press release about how they're building these lovely homes for for students and all the other people who need houses, whereas at the other end of it they're producing marketing brochures for foreign investors.
Absolutely.
And interesting, we're now seeing the first of a series of protests from local activists, in particular some of the Unite in Unison activists, about the shortage of housing. We recently had that big housing conference at the Corn Exchange, and a number of councillors actually turned up to that one. And then we've obviously had that protest on Rustat Road a couple of days ago from the Cambridge Waterworks building, because according again to John Bell in the Cambridge News, only 6% of the homes on that site are being allocated to for affordable housing, the marketing from that specific development seems to be aimed towards at either London overspill or to foreign investors with very, very nice pictures of St John's College Bridge and things like that.
Yeah, and neatly bringing it back to the election again. I mean, Heidi Allen has said that, she has to say if she gets elected, of course, but when she gets elected, the Northstowe development will probably happen on her watch. And she said on this very station, talking to Sam Davis, that, this is something that, we have to get right. And she sees herself as, as the MP, as someone who can bang heads together and get the right people talking, because, there is a fear that the councils won't talk and the developers won't be talking, and someone needs to pull the whole thing together. And that's certainly something that Heidi has in mind.
On the subject of Election Studio, I should point out that this coming Sunday could be rather interesting. Sam Davis is going to be speaking to Julian Huppert for the Lib Dems and also to Daniel Zeichner for Labour. So that's Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Repeat here on 105 Drive on Tuesday after 6 o'clock. And of course, as if I needed to tell you, Election Studio will be on the air on May the 8th, if I get the date of the Friday correct, from 6 o'clock in the morning, and we'll guide you through the results, both national and local, as they come in. We haven't got too much time left, but I wanted to ask Pam about the kind of reaction that you're getting from your students and those people in and around you at the Anglia Ruskin, because there must be some interesting perspectives there.
Yes, they've had their own hustings at Anglia Ruskin, and there is a keen interest, but there is a particular interest from foreign students, because of course European students and students from Commonwealth countries can vote in this election, and it's very interesting talking to them about how they feel about UKIP. They feel a big threat, that they feel very uncomfortable that UKIP could be a force to be reckoned with, because that they feel that their impression is that UKIP is a racist party, and so that is an interesting.
And that's despite the assurances that UKIP will give, say they welcome people, they want the Australian point system, etc., which one would assume most of the students at the Ruskin would probably pass, if not all of them. Yeah,
it is. Despite that, there is still this fear about UKIP, but they are very, very interested, probably more interested than the British students. They're very interested and feel very proud to be able to vote in our election, actually. They're really interested, and they're taking it seriously, and they're really researching the parties.
Oh, that's interesting. There have been some interesting polls. In one of his analysis, Phil Rogers, occasional contributor to this station, has been looking at some. I'm trying to sum them up now, because typically I can't find it. Oh, there we go, that's the one. Because there's the Lord Ashcroft poll of a couple of weeks ago, which Phil and I think others have suggested potentially underrepresented the younger vote, simply because when the field work was done, and I guess Lord Ashcroft would admit this himself, when the field work was done, there weren't actually many students around because they were all on holiday. And subsequently, there have been some different polls for others. There's like a Cambridge High Flyers survey, and also the TCS newspaper did one as well. And on the High Flyers, Labour and Conservative both at 31%. Greens 23, which is interesting. Lib Dems at 12. The TCS survey, 34 for Labour, 22.8 for Lib Dems, 21.8 for the Greens, 18.2 for the Conservatives, and UKIP on 2.5. And I guess the key one amongst students is the Varsity survey. And the survey asked whether or not students plan to vote in Cambridge or in their home constituency. And amongst those planning to vote in Cambridge, the results were Labour 33, Greens 24.5, Lib Dems 20.2. This is interesting. Conservative 19.9, and UKIP 2.1, which all of those surveys, whilst the top varies quite a little bit, the bottom, it's UKIP.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But one of the things to remember, and it's interesting to see how fairly close some of those surveys are showing the Labour and the Conservative vote across the student population.
Yes.
It's not reflected in the amount of student activism. The Greens and the Labour Party have been absolutely buzzing in terms of their local action. And certainly when Liberal Youth came down to Cambridge, again, there were over 50 people who came down to Cambridge to campaign for Julian Huppert. We've not seen that reflected in the Conservative Party at a student level.
I arguably not, definitely not a UKIP at student, but I from the sort of materials that I don't know if you can back me up on this. If I look at my role as a Cambridge resident, which as most people know is in the next street from our studios here, my letterbox is crammed with Lib Dem and Labour materials. Next to no Conservative. 1-2 pieces from the Lib Dems, lots of Greens as well, which reflects. I think it more than reflects the area. It's a Labour councillors in this part of town. On the other side, if I look at what we're being sent by the candidates, it's the Liberals, Lib Dem, the Greens and Labour